Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, as we say when we have our global calls. I'm Fiona, based over here in lockdown in Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's my pleasure to be a facilitator of this session. Myself, I run a little company called Katoa Limited. We do kaupapa Māori research and evaluation, so by Māori for Māori. My dad's Māori from the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand. My mum's Pākehā white. So it's great. I think we've got 3 great sessions actually. And when I was having another read through the abstracts, it was just sparking for me with this morning's keynote, the Ed Gordon lecture by Nyla. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from people because all 3, in my theming of them as a part-time qualitative researcher, is about re-inclusion and reimagining, like Nyla was saying this morning. So we'll kick off. We've got Tasha first up. So each of the presenters is going to play their pre-recorded presentation. We're going to then spend a little bit of time to see if anyone's got any questions or comments. So feel free to put your hand up, put something in chat, just unmute yourself and speak out loud. That'd be great. And then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for a bit of general discussion. So over to you, Tasha. Welcome from Rutgers and Graduate School of Education. Have you graduated or are you still there, since this is the abstract that was 18 months old now?
I know, no, that I was beginning and I'll be wrapping up in May. So it's coming. It's coming.
Brilliant.
I'm going to jump right in because I introduced myself on the video and I want to make sure I don't eat into folks' time. So I'm going to screen share and I will cut it at 12 minutes exactly if it's not too awkward, just because it goes a few seconds over. And again, I'm usually not first. And I've always thought about if I were first, I'd make sure I didn't do these things. So I want to make sure I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Wait, I want to press the audio button first. I did that before. Okay. Hi, my name is Tasha Austin. I'm a PhD candidate at Rutgers University, and I'll be sharing with you about cultural refugeeism, materializing the cultural expertise of Black youth. I do want to first acknowledge that I am coming to you from the Lenape lands, unceded, and acknowledging the relationship that Indigenous folks have with the land here, what most folks call New Jersey, but also coming to you from relationships of my own ancestry and my ways of knowing and being, of being Afro-descended from my ancestors to my current village is very important for me to acknowledge where I come from, both geographically and epistemologically, as that's how I approach my work. And so the question driving my research, this is conceptually framed, is what are the shifts that we can make conceptually to support the recognition of criticality of Black youth in classrooms? And so that heavily depends upon acknowledging that we're not accounting for it within traditional education spaces in terms of instruction, nor are we measuring it, right? So how do we know it exists? And what do we have to do as those who are actually researching and attending to this question to recognize what may already be there? And so taking the same terminology from the very definition of criticality, which we have been told is what's necessary for our youth to be college career ready, right? Conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, and reaching a conclusion. I actually just want to highlight for you a bit of the criticality of Black youth, which largely finds itself outside of classroom spaces. So I'll just play for you part of this video.
A white kid that lived in Sherwood as well told me to get on the bus and ride, like catch the city bus back to where I'm from.
But soon he would find his footing with a group of friends who shared his views.
Some of my best friends that I'm still cool with today, they introduced me to an organization called Urban Underground. And Urban Underground taught me a lot about systemic oppression and how to point out systemic oppression, how to fight systemic oppression.
Through that education, Eric felt compelled to speak out against racial injustice for himself and his community.
I'm tired of feeling like this. I'm tired of seeing other folks that look like me being tired of this, and I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of seeing it on the news. I'm tired of growing up and watching it happen all my life and me still sitting here and not doing anything. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of feeling like I have to be the voice for my people.
And as Eric watched the killing of George Floyd, he knew he needed to stand up.
I just thought, okay, what can I do to create a symbol, not a symbol of peace, not a symbol of equality, but a symbol of tiredness and a symbol of affirmative action, a symbol of fighting back. And I came to the conclusion that it's time to march.
And march he did. On June 6th, Eric organized a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest in Shorewood.
My parents were there as well. I felt empowered. It was exhilarating, seeing the crowd, seeing the people, seeing how we control the crowd and how the crowd listen, and just stepping up to the plate and leading with the folks that I love and that love.
So just to stop there and really allow for you to reflect on what this young man, as a singular representative among thousands of what Black youth do in terms of engaging critically with the world around them, from conceptualizing to then applying what they've conceived of, analyzing that which they're faced with, synthesizing the information, evaluating, right? And then reaching a conclusion. And while the Today Show recognized this young man, oftentimes these examples go unrecognized. And so there is another example that I wanted to share with you that we don't exactly have the time to watch the full video clip of. So that being said, it really brings us to acknowledge that we're talking about two separate things here. Do Black youth have these skills? Yes. Do we account for them or teach them in classrooms? Perhaps less so than we think. And I use Cole's piece where he says, it's really geniuses that live in the hood. One of his participants said that, because it's not even that the Black youth themselves don't recognize this level of expertise, but that somehow in the way that we measure, in the way that we instruct within our K-12 spaces, it's really just a loss of that expertise based on the design, right? And so the next question becomes, in terms of how we're conceiving of these populations, are we seeing them as cultural populations, or are we seeing them as racialized populations? And so there are different definitions of culture, but to be succinct, culture in the way that we use it today is really a much more expansive, more neoliberal way of applying a term that used to have much more specificity to now be all encompassing, right? And to encompass race as well. Oftentimes we euphemize race as culture, when in reality, if we break those two apart, we decouple them, we could be much more specific with what populations we're talking about, what are the actual valuable insights that those populations bring to classroom spaces, and then how to target that value that they bring and to their benefit. And so it was really representative of the 1960s, post-1960s discourse, where Winter says culture was exchanged for race, right? So now we can no longer talk about race directly, and culture came to encompass race in a way that actually is very detrimental to populations who are still primarily conceived of as Black or as being of a certain race, more so than actually what culture was previously meant to identify, which is more of this aesthetic phenomenon, belief systems, perspectives, behaviors, and even products. And so my argument would be that if we perceive these groups as raced instead of having culture, it doesn't mean that those populations are not critical enough to see how these dynamics work in the world, but it can inhibit our instruction and our assessment from then treating those populations as inherently critical. And so Black youth are part of a group, right, of the Afro-descended who find themselves very placeless within the geopolitical borders of the United States. And so I pull from Hannah Arendt's work in which she's talking about Jewish populations, but it's highly applicable to Black populations, in which if you are constantly not belonging, right, placeless, stateless, as a stolen people, right, on stolen land, then it's impossible for other nation states, right, to advocate on your behalf because you don't belong there, right? But then the state in which you find yourself also has this power to confiscate anything that you create that's material and non-material. And so this is the double bind in which Black youth find themselves, right? And so the culture of Black youth identifies that. That is the level of criticality that they bring to the classroom space, right? Like, this is a place that I don't really feel like acknowledges me or to which I may belong, but also it seems everything I make then is automatically the property of the state, right? And they resist that. And so what they begin to do is create the relationships, right? Place make, become those who imbue value upon the place in which they find themselves. Stolen land, maybe an institution that has not historically or presently valued what they bring, they begin to determine what has value for themselves as they make their own place, in spite of being perpetually placeless. And so for that reason, the term that I landed upon was refugee. We know traditionally refugees find themselves outside of state borders, right? Outside of being citizens of anywhere. And whereas the Afro-descended African Americans primarily are citizens of the United States, we know that relationship is fraught constitutionally, but even in action. And so the cultural refugee is actually a culture maker, one who, despite perpetual dispossession of the material and non-material, practice sovereignty, but one that is supraspatial, right? Like self-sovereignty of who they are, their identity, by cultivating the meaningful relationships that they have with places, with entities, with ideas towards their own liberation. And so to give a better picture of that, I lean on Harlem Renaissance writer Langston Hughes, who wrote, "I too sing America. I am the darker brother," right? And so he makes a reference of needing to work in the kitchen, eat in the kitchen, right? Be hidden away. And so that what we make, these Black youth, isn't really necessarily associated with their own cultural expertise or with the level of criticality that they understand their worth, and they have their own ends to which they aspire. And then he later says, "But I eat and I grow strong," right? So these youth continue to create, they continue to make meaning, they continue to place make, despite not actually being acknowledged as having that capacity within the classroom. And so to restate it, Black youth who through normalized displacement are become culture makers through relationships with both animate and inanimate entities to assert joy, resistance, and healing as an act of self-sovereignty. And so I gave those two clips, but there are thousands more of representations of Black youth taking up space in these ways and making meaning. And so cultural refugeeism recognizes that schools are another geopolitical space in which boyhood and girlhood can be reimagined and reclaimed by Black youth. And so the success of instruction, I would argue, must be measured against this conceptualization of Black youth as cultural refugees, measured against how against how it centers on Black futures, as determined by the identity pursuits that the students themselves have, right? They might be aspiring towards ends that the state or the local power cannot see as having value, and that engaged pedagogues have to be the ones who create an environment by having those students recognize one another's, right, value and culture making potential, and then co-create environments, right, through radical hospitality. So through opportunities that then tap these youth to be the leaders of the space through material curation, through environmental design, but also through the constant measuring of the, of the growth of these youth against their own ideals. And so for further reading, I recommend reading about Space to Freedom Dream and what that looks like, and the practicing of sovereignty for Black youth, how to allow for those youth, to encourage those youth to lead in the curation of materials and pedagogies and spaces, how they can be involved in healing as a political act, and of course, how to ensure that we become engaged pedagogues who center the need for students to see the value in one another in order to partake in this world building. So thank you.
Wonderful, Tasha. Thank you so much. I see
Thank you.
Professor Hobson's already leapt in with his comment in the comment space about the powerful presentation. And I must admit, humbly for me, such a wonderful glossary of terms that just have so much power in themselves for the way we talk about this. So I've just been writing words down from what you've been saying. So Rodney says, are you seeing reimagined spaces for minoritized, oppressed, displaced, refugee youth and other nation states towards the healing and cultural sustaining liberatory ways elsewhere? Do you see this, these sparks of joy, the expansion of spaces?
Yeah, I think, so my focus is US youth, US Black youth. And when I say Black, I mean it as a political term, right? As folks who came here with different ethnicities, with different home countries, right? But which all got dissolved politically for, you know, this kind of white supremacist venture to then use Blackness as an anchor, right? To maintain that white supremacy. So when I say Black, I do mean it expansively, but I am thinking within the geopolitical borders of K-12 schooling in the US. And I uniquely think of that space, not because I don't recognize that there is a Pan-Africanness to which, like, you know, subjugated peoples, colonial subjects all over kind of go through some similar, some of these similar culture making, these kind of processes. But in terms of if I see it, I do see it like in terms of my involvement in digital literacy, right? I think about Arab Spring, I think about even Black Spring, right? I think about these movements that are global in which youth who are subjugated use tools to resist, to practice healing, right? To expel harm from their bodies, to really do this placemaking work that is very, very ancestral. But in terms of the way that it goes unrecognized, I'm trying to eke out a space that speaks directly to the unique ways in which it really is like discursively erased in the US American schooling. And I say that because through the way that we language what achievement looks like and the way that we measure what achievement looks like, it is almost impossible, right, for this level of criticality and culture making to be recognized within those spaces. And so my hope is that it kind of really inspires those of us who want to be engaged pedagogues and who want to kind of resist this kind of colonial project that's extended through our US institutions, to really see yourselves as responsible for radical hospitality, to see yourself responsible for backing up and allowing for particularly Indigenous minoritized youth to be the ones, particularly Black youth, to be the ones to take the lead in showing you through their culture making all the highest levels of thinking, right, and criticality that they regularly endure, right? That making it to the classroom door, making it to the schoolhouse, typically is the reflection of deep criticality that they already have, because that in and of itself oftentimes is a feat. So whereas I do see it for sure in other places, the specificity of what I'm focusing on is really kind of to push back against a lot of these K-12 US policies and practices.
Fabulous. Other comments or questions, follow-ups? Sylvia says I'm supposed to wait for 30 minutes before I talk. You know, I mean, just please feel interrupt. I loved what you said about tiredness too. You know, and to me it sort of signaled almost like a sense of impatience and you know, that dialogic turn. When I heard Greta Thunberg speak about climate change. It was like she was in a sumo ring, and she just basically pushed the adults out by going, you know, this climate change word, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like global warming, blah, blah, blah. And that was a wonderful turn.
And I do think there's the urgency. Yeah, the urgency is very unique to Black youth in a way as well. It's kind of like the convergence between that fervor of being youthful, but also between recognizing that like incrementality is really a work of white supremacy, right? So just wait, right? And so James Baldwin is like, my father had to wait, my uncles had to wait, my cousins had to wait, like we're not going to keep waiting. And so youth have this unique combination of maybe urgency just from being young, but also they have the strength, right, and the criticality to call it out. And they also typically haven't really bought in so much to like this kind of racial capitalism in which we're like, I want to speak up, but it's going to cost me too much. And so they really are leaders in very unique ways that I hope that, you know, those of us who choose to really do this work can really center, right? And I do want to offer a word of caution that it's really not about turning it into another means of appropriation, right? It's not turning it into another means of, oh, you know, y'all make culture, so let's take it, right? We're not trying to recreate that. What we are trying to do, though, is to allow for Black youth to become leaders in determining where they want to go. So if we're talking about assessment and evaluation, like we can't measure folks against ends and goals that are not their own. And so I'm really hoping that through backing up and through providing space for these folks who are leaders in so many spaces already to actually see the classroom as another space that they can potentially lead in through being culture makers. And I'm thinking of a piece that really inspired me. It's Flenog 2016, and it's identity maps. He's using portraiture, which is Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot's work. She's a sociologist, but long story short, he's asking these two young Black men, 16 or so, high achieving in California, like, what do you do? Who are you? What's most important to you? And they're pulling on these different artifacts, multimodal artifacts, drawings, all types of things to demonstrate how their personalities reflect who they are and what matters to them. And they both put circles that were pretty large for family. And so the researcher resisted kind of like this kind of Western approach of like, well, here's the interview data, let me read the transcripts. But then digging beyond the artifacts and said, but can you tell me what that means? Can we unpack that further? Why is this circle this shape and why is it overlapping? And long story short, your typical narrative would say, where's dad, right? And so both of these young men did not have their fathers with them, but when they began to talk about the circle that said family, it was actually their fathers that played the most prominent role. And so I say all that to say that just because what we value or what we've been groomed to value as folks who have power, traditional power within the classroom space, isn't always apparent in the way that, you know, these young culture makers really show up and place make, doesn't mean that it doesn't have actual value. So these young men were seeing great success in their lives. And based on all accounts, you know, from these kind of traditional narratives of the absent father and whatnot, we would think that that was based on family. And then we can make assumptions about the absent father. But if you were to actually engage deeply with them, you would find that their meaning making is distinct and unique. And if we just back up and give them enough space, right, to practice that sovereignty, then they could really just go leaps and bounds in terms of who they want to be in their own goals.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, as I say to people, you know, how many assumption hurdles did you have to leap over? Get, you know, back up. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Kia ora for that. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Aneta, my niece. I have no idea what she's going to say. Total disclaimer. Over to you, Aneta.
Thank you. All right, I will share my screen. Started. Kia ora koutou, tēnei te me.
Oops.
Greetings, my name is Aneta, Katarina, Raiha, Cram, and I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'd also like to first up introduce myself as I connect to the land here in Aotearoa and to my whakapapa, my genealogy. So ko waia, who am I? Ko takitimu te waka, ko mohaka te awa, ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi, ko te huki te marae, ko Ngāti Pāhauera te hapu, ko tā whirirangi te maunga. So I am originally on my mother's side from the east coast of the North Island, so Ngāti Kahungunu, Ngāti Pāhauera tribal area. And also what you'll see here is a picture that was taken from atop my mountain, Tā Whirirangi, as it looks out onto the coastal region. Kia ora, so I am currently in my second year of a PhD at Victoria University of Wellington in Aotearoa, and the focus of my studies is on exploring Indigenous evaluation frameworks. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today, sharing a little about the literature that informs my work, the focus of my studies, and a few challenges, as well as where I'm hoping this work will lead to. So I'm going to start off with a few basics, which I'm sure a lot of us will already know, so just sharing that evaluation as we understand, according to Michael Scriven, is the systematic process of exploring the merit, worth and value of an initiative, program or policy. It is through the process of evaluation that findings may be determined, decisions made, and any program elements that support program delivery identified. Alternatively, any elements that do not support the program to deliver on its intended goals can be removed or improved on through evaluation. And the purpose of an evaluation framework is to provide a systematic way to support evaluation practice by laying out procedures and standards that are useful, feasible, and ethical to employ within a given context or sector. Having a clear framework makes explicit the standards and values from which an evaluation will be practiced. Frameworks can support an organisation to make clear what they value, or a sector for what's considered appropriate when engaging in a specific area, or a community or people as a means of highlighting culture and context as it relates to programs and evaluation. So we know the great importance of culture and how it is present in evaluation, not only in the context in which evaluation is implemented, but also in the design of the programs being evaluated, the design of the evaluation, methods chosen, methodology chosen, and the overarching framework for said evaluation. However, due to the dominant place that Western evaluation frameworks continue to hold in the field, there is a lack of recognition and continued exclusion of culturally distinct ways of being and knowing. Even evaluation approaches that have been developed to be more akin to ideas of inclusion, social justice, and having participants at the decision-making table, such as collaborative approaches, they often fall short and have Indigenous people still fighting to lead in spaces that concern them. This then means that Indigenous people need to be explicit through research, literature, and standing within the field of evaluation about who can do the work with their people, in what ways, stating what is acceptable and what is not. Having an Indigenous evaluation framework guide evaluation practices and communities is a way of making that explicit, as well as solidifying Indigenous evaluation approaches as valid in evaluation spaces. Evaluation practice that is by, for, and with Indigenous peoples support good quality evaluation, decolonisation, self-determination in Indigenous spaces, and further. Indigenous evaluation provides an opportunity for community self-determination and for practitioners to decolonise. Indigenous evaluation is a term that encompasses ways to practice evaluation that puts indigeneity and community at the centre through the recognition of Indigenous culture and knowledge systems. So there have been a number of scholars that have worked to bring Indigenous knowledge, values and practices into evaluation. One of the most notable being, of course, Linda Tuhiwai Smith and her work around decolonizing methodologies. Her piece critically interrogated the history of colonization and its impact on research, evaluation, and also research being a tool for perpetuating neo-colonial thinking. Smith's work has had a major influence on the work of Indigenous practitioners, as well as the work of evaluation theorists globally. So the likes of Tuhiwai Smith, Bagele Chilisa and her work around Indigenous research methodologies, Kathy Tibbetts and her work in Hawaii, Joan LaFrance, Fiona Cram, Nikki Bowman, Nanwihi Paihana, amongst others, that have their work has opened up the space that validates Indigenous voices, knowledge systems and practices in the field of research and evaluation. Okay, so what Indigenous evaluation frameworks currently exist? So there seems to be quite a few that have been developed in the past few years. So from a brief search of grey literature, academic databases and informal discussions with colleagues, can confirm that there is quite a few that are spread out across the globe, and I've got 3 presented here, which you may or may not be familiar with, that each highlight the importance of incorporating Indigenous knowledge, values, tools, and priorities of a specific community into a framework. So here we've got the Aloha Framework developed by the Queen Liliuokalani Trust back in 2019. And so this framework is very much undergirded by ideas and values present within Hawaii. They also brought in learnings from elders as well, highlighting the importance of reflective practice. And then after that, we've got the Canadian bundle developed in 2018, which is a collection of methods that can be used in evaluation practice. And then there's the Pacific Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Capacity Strengthening REBLIB, developed in 2020, which is a framework that's really focused on building evaluation capability across the Pacific. All right, so what's missing? What is my research looking to fill? So we know that Indigenous evaluation frameworks exist. However, there doesn't seem to be as strong a presence of that existence within the academic literature space, specifically on how these frameworks were developed, what knowledge was included, and the impact that they are having on the communities that they have been developed for. So my work is looking to fill these gaps specifically. So there are 3 questions that focus this work. The first looks at what evaluation frameworks have been developed by, for, and with Indigenous communities in Aotearoa, Australia, the Pacific, and Te Reo Islands, looking specifically at how they were developed, what stakeholder groups were involved, the extent to which communities are actually using these frameworks, and what impact using these frameworks is actually having on the communities that they've been developed for. I'm also going to look at what the commonalities are across the frameworks, and then what are some key learnings and takeaways that can then be used to support other communities in their journey to develop their own community-specific framework. And so what will this work involve? So I plan to phase it. So first do a document review, looking at what frameworks currently exist. And then the second phase will include interviewing with framework developers. Again, asking those questions around who was involved, what knowledge was included, and the impact that these frameworks are having on the respective communities that they were developed for. And then finally, the third phase will be looking to dive deeply into two specific frameworks. So I'll do site visits, one in Aotearoa with one framework and another in international sites, really digging deep into what utilising these frameworks look like and the sort of context in which they're being implemented. So I've currently done my first interview with my first framework, which was developed by an iwi or a tribe here in Aotearoa, and I've kind of grappling with, before continuing to move forward and interviewing and collecting data, is really honing in on defining what a framework is, looking at those differences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and really sort of questioning whether a framework is the right word, considering how Indigenous is quite expansive and inclusive, whereas the Western understanding of a framework is quite rigid and fixed. And then the second point that I've been reflecting on and reading about, but still really needing to hone in on, is what it means to be a good guest or a good manuhiri in different cultural spaces. That idea that even though you are Indigenous doesn't mean that you can just go and connect in with another Indigenous community without actually critically reflecting on what you need to know, who you need to know, what connections you need to make, and also sort of understandings around cultural knowledge and reciprocity, what it means to give back with these communities. So yeah, these are two areas that I'm still thinking through, still grappling with, and how looking at how best to move forward as I engage in this work. And so the expected outputs and outcomes from this research are really twofold. The first being to really strengthen the presence within the academic literature around Indigenous evaluation frameworks, and also the second being to come up with some key learnings that can support other communities in the development of their own community-specific framework. Kia ora. Also, if you do have any thoughts or perspectives on this work, I'd really be interested to hear from you. So please do keep in touch. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Aneta. Thank you so much for that. That's your start of a journey with, I love how you go unpackaging whether it's a framework and what is it that you're trying to do in terms of, what is this thing, evaluation to Indigenous people. Good luck with that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Questions or comments?
Can I say, Aneta, I so appreciate your problematizing the word framework when we think always of Indigenous peoples and communities, and even the Black community being expansive, the ways in which we connect with one another and think about the sciences in particular. And this idea of a framework, that really resonated with me, like pausing to stop and think, to what degree does that word confine and constrain versus honor that expansiveness of culture and context, and how we think about. So I really appreciate that so much. Thank you for giving that to me today.
Thank you.
I was typing something in. I'm sorry, did I jump ship?
No, you go.
Well, I was typing something in, but I can just as well just share it out loud. And that was quite stunning in terms of thinking about where you're headed, Netta. I was looking at the listening to you, and it got me thinking about a word you did not mention, but has a lot of weight in our academic spaces, and how what we do and how we work responds and is responded to, and that's the word ethics or ethicality. So while you didn't mention it, the notion of how to be a guest of Manuhiri helps me think through relationships in ways, and I wonder if this guest piece might have implications for those of us who think about this word and this space, particularly in institutional review boards, how we communicate with communities and what we leave. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, I guess maybe this isn't directly in response to that comment, but just picking up on the idea around being a good guest in different cultural spaces. I don't think that's something that has really been explored in the Indigenous space, and also as we relate to culture, just that idea that just because you are Indigenous, that then you can go and work in spaces that might be Indigenous, but something that you don't connect with. You have no understanding of their context, their values, the way that they understand the world. And there is that need to pause and reflect on your position and how you are going to go about approaching being a good manuhiri, being a good guest in that space, making sure that you don't trample on people's dignity, their way of seeing the world. So it is definitely something that to explore further. Yeah, thank you.
I think I've been a bit wider than that, Aneta, with when I was, my sort of my half-baked thoughts, because when you introduced yourself, that global positioning system, that location on the land in relation to your mountain, to your place. And then I was thinking about what Tasha said about a stolen people on stolen land. And my brain was going, when our mosque shooting happened in Christchurch, the affront to local Māori, that it was an affront to their hospitality, their ability to host people. And I went back to what Tasha was saying, and I thought she did say stolen people on stolen land. I thought maybe she should add, Tasha, I can't see you, sorry, Tasha, add stolen Indigenous people on stolen Indigenous land. And wondering, in the mix of frameworks and thinking about evaluation and host responsibilities, there's a bigger context there somehow that we need to keep tagging into, so that we can make those connections in terms of local causes, but across that, I think young people, how we host people here from the refugee community, the Pacific Island community, the Māori community, that when young people get together, they share a criticality that can shape the world. And so it's, as I say, half-baked. I don't know if you've got a response or anyone else.
I just appreciate that, and knowing particularly, and I know this to be true in other imperial centers, but I think about just the coalitions between youth, usually within the context of hip hop, particularly in the US, across cultures, ethnicities, newcomers, folks who are not newcomers. There's a space within that youth criticality that thirsts for a way to express, thirsts for a way to heal, thirsts for a way to place make. And it's very interesting to me the way you put those words together of stolen Indigenous folks, because it's interesting. I don't know why it's fraught, but it's definitely a fraught topic to claim or to have Black folks hailed as Indigenous, but truly Black folks are Indigenous. They're just displaced and dispossessed. So it's very interesting to think about what that looks like in a globalized world, where folks have access to one another despite geopolitical boundaries, but who might still share interesting phenomena regarding how they experience their placelessness, but also how they experience their indigeneity. So yeah, that's definitely a lot of layers to connect and think through.
Thanks, Tasha. Do others want to chip in? Okay, we'll rock over to Nisha's then. So introducing the team from, now I'm sorry, I don't know what your UVKASL is, so Nisha's going to tell us that. And but capturing the untold narratives of leaders within historically Black colleges and universities. And so I'm really looking forward to that focus on leadership that your team's going to bring to this session, Nisha. I'm ignoring Camille because she told me that you were the one who had all the information. So you take the spotlight. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending our presentation. I'm from the Center for the Advancement of STEM Leadership. I'm here with the research team, and I do an introduction, so I'll just get straight into the video. Welcome to our presentation, Capturing the Untold Narrative of HBCU Leaders, Sustaining HBCU Leaders to Broaden Participation in STEM. The facilitators of this presentation are Dr. Camille McHale, Dr. Kimmery Ingerman, Dr. Angelique Tucker-Blackman, Dr. Muhammadu Bankana, and myself, Nisha Clavier. We are from the Center for the Advancement of STEM Leadership, or CASL. The mission of CASL is to substantially broaden the participation of students who have been marginalized from U.S. STEM higher education. CASL is interested in exploring the leadership styles and perspectives of HBCU leaders. We hypothesize that the success of HBCUs in broadening participation in STEM is due to an identifiable set of leadership styles and strategies. It is of the utmost importance to acknowledge those who came before us, those who walk among us, and the generations of persons who will stand when we are no longer physically present in the earth. Given the nature of our work and the history of HBCUs across the nation and the U.S. Virgin Islands, we acknowledge the native land on which we conduct our research. We acknowledge the painful history and hard work of people who paved the way for those of us currently occupying these lands. We honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land. This presentation is in honor of Dr. Muhammadu Bankana, who passed away last year. He was an amazing researcher and friend, and CASL misses him dearly. The purpose of this paper is to gather first-person empirical data from HBCU leaders to discover specific leadership characteristics that influence the high outcome of African-American STEM graduates, to learn what practices are employed by HBCU leaders regarding broadening participation in STEM, and to propose a model of support for HBCU leaders. HBCUs have been in existence since Cheney University opened its doors in 1837. Today, there are approximately 101 HBCUs within 19 states and territories, with more than 228,000 students enrolled. HBCUs have made and continue to make significant contributions to the American higher education landscape. Some contributions: HBCUs have been involved in Black students' intellectual growth and development by providing opportunities to access and succeed at higher education. The undergraduate STEM productivity rate of HBCUs are contributing to a diverse workforce and allowing the U.S. to remain competitive in the global market. 80% of Black Americans with degrees in medicine and dentistry received training at one of two traditional HBCUs, Howard University and Meharry Medical College. To better understand factors contributing to HBCU success in broadening participation in STEM, CASTLE used the framework developed by Bowman, Dean, and Gallows to examine the leadership style and practices of HBCU leaders. For years, leadership has been analyzed through industrial lenses. There is an abundance of research on various styles of leadership. However, there is limited research on the 4 academic frames through which Bowman, Deal, and Gallows suggested that academic leadership be viewed through. The 4 frames shown here are structural, political, human resources, and symbolic. Structural leaders seek to analyze the key features and needs of an organization and its environment in order to build capacity. They also determine the right roles, rules, and arrangements in order to transform a variety of inputs into outputs. Next, political leaders focus on the needs and concerns of internal and external stakeholders. This viewpoint sees academic institutions as vibrant ecosystems that house a variety of different species or groups, each with its own specific characteristics, capabilities, interests, needs, and lifestyles. Human resource leaders support, challenge, and encourage and coach those on their teams. They view employees as resources to be developed so that they maximize their potential in service to the mission. They focus on creating productive relationships and view relationships as vital to organization success. Symbolic leaders focus on issues of meaning and belief. They tell the story of the preferred future, inspire the team, and keep the mission and vision of the organization at the forefront. With that framework in mind, CASTLE conducted semi-structured interviews, and the purpose was to answer these following questions. What leadership styles, characteristics, or practices do HBCU leaders have that contribute to broadening participation in STEM? Which academic frames align with HBCU leadership styles and contribute to broadening participation in STEM? What supports are needed to sustain HBCU leaders? Criteria sampling was used to select 30 HBCUs from the 101 HBCUs in the nation. 17 of them were private and 13 were public. For this paper, 4 presidents and 8 deans were interviewed, 3 females and 9 males. How we conducted our data analysis. In vivo codes were created using the words and phrases leaders mentioned to describe the perspective and behaviors related to STEM leadership and student success. Bowman and Gallows' 2011 academic frames, human, resource, political, structural, and symbolic, were used as a framework to analyze the data. Themes were identified and coded. Researchers were careful not to force themes into 4 frames and recognize that some were blended. Now we will discuss the themes that emerged from the analysis. Here we see emerging themes that align with the human resource frame. Participants' characteristics and perspective align most with this frame than the others. With the human resource style, leaders focus on building and supporting their team members. So though the bolded terms are the themes that emerge, and the italicized are quotes that match these different examples of quotes. For example, understanding your people. One president stated, I hire good people and let them do their jobs. I don't have time to micromanage a provost or a dean or a chair. If you're doing that as a president or a chancellor, something is wrong with your leadership model. Another president mentioned, it is mentoring. It is not so much what's happening specifically in the classroom because you can get that online and do that anywhere. It is building one's confidence and broadening one's vision. If you don't have confidence, you don't perform well. And if you don't know what opportunities are, then you're misdirected. One quote from a dean that aligned with participate in and provide professional leadership development opportunities. I was able to participate in year-long leadership trainings and attend workshops about being a department chair. Attending those leadership development trainings were very meaningful into codifying whether I wanted to be a leader. From the analysis, we noticed that a lot of the participants, deans, and presidents focus a lot on providing opportunities for their faculty. They noted that the opportunities they themselves had helped them to become better leaders, and they emphasized this heavily as an important aspect to building good faculty and assisting the HBCU community. Here we have some structural themes. Increase inclusivity of STEM projects to other STEM and non-STEM departments. Provide faculty with strategies that show how to engage students in research. Encourage faculty to increase research aptitude and expand program offerings and opportunities for students. One dean noted, it is important for faculty to understand how to engage students in research in a way that research stays rigorous and that the mentoring of the students is not taxing or does not take away from what faculty members were trying to do. One president said, sometimes you have to develop programs that facilitate students' growth and their readiness to be successful STEM majors. This dean indicates, I try to foster collaboration among departments so that each side knows what the other is doing. One collaborative proposal reached my desk and suggests someone from a non-STEM department be included in the proposal to increase interdisciplinary collaborations. I ensure that the institution's infrastructure is able to support the resources needed for faculty to conduct research. I understand the necessity for providing the space and time for faculty to accomplish their work. So these were examples of structural themes. There were several other themes that emerged as well. Here we have political themes. Political leaders focus on the needs and concerns of internal and external stakeholders. They place a lot of emphasis on creating a collaborative environment. Here we have a dean that said, the collaborative process allows for divergent and design thinking and a platform to not only think about their research problems, but to engage their peers into helping them craft their research ideas, refine their research ideas, and make sure their methods and their strategies are going to really get to the endpoint that they're looking for. One president mentioned, I took time off about 4 summers ago, took 2 weeks off and visited every program director at a STEM government agency. We came away with 2 grants, and now last year we were named a national center, the only one in that state. This president stated, as a leader, when you come into an institution, if you want to promote STEM, you need to give some initial signs that you're willing to do that. And the best sign is to put dollars on the table. In the last one we have here, we've created partnerships. There are some amazing institutions in this region. It's not a competition. You are here where the money is, but your diversity is lacking. With this frame, we found that more presidents align with political themes than did the deans. The last frame we have is the symbolic. So here are some themes. Love the university mission, have competence guided by vision, appreciate diversity, and have personal faith. One president indicated, my faith is extremely important to me. I'm unapologetic about my faith. I don't care if I served at a state or private. I am clear about who I am and whose I am. I think for me, I am doing what I'm called to do. These deans indicated, one skill I hope that leaders learn from attending leadership development trainings is the ability to manage a diverse faculty. I enjoy working at this university because diversity is respected, appreciated, and valued. Lastly, this president said, I know in my spirit this is where I was supposed to be. And so it happened, and I came with a radical vision. The symbolic frame is mission and value focused, and it showed in a lot of the responses from the participants. Here we have some recommendations based on our study. 1, provide leaders with the support and tools to create meaningful experiences for students. Invest in leaders by providing leadership development opportunities. Provide financial resources for leaders to engage in professional and scholastic opportunities. Strive to create a family-like diverse campus for the HBCU community. A major emphasis was placed on the benefits of participating in and the need to provide leadership development opportunities for themselves and their academic leaders. Several of the deans accredited the success to the trainings and support they received throughout their careers. From the lenses of HBCU leaders, the HBCU experience is student-focused. Providing authentic experiences and opportunities for the student community was also another practice that ranked highly among the themes. Service learning projects, outreach activities, and expanding the boundaries of the classroom were some of the various ways that participants felt were necessary to create lifelong STEM learners and a unique experience as well. Creating a family-like diverse campus was also important, given the unique nature and environment of HBCUs. To sustain HBCU leaders, institutions should invest in their individual growth and development and provide them with the resources to support their students. Thank you for attending this presentation. Funding for this research was provided by NSF. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Dr. Camille McHale. And you could also visit the website, the CASEL website at www.advancedstemleadership.net. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have during the question and answer.
Thank you, Nisha. Are you saying we should ask Camille questions now?
Yeah.
It was
Actually,
wonderful.
the entire team is here. So if there are any questions, we can also take it in the chat. But Dr. Engerman and Dr. Blackman are also here.
Lovely. I mean, I just took away from that the notion of just showing up, get into relationship and get better. You know, and for the hierarchy to give you the opportunities to get better as leadership. So, and wonderful quotes. Perhaps the others in the team would like to comment or questions?
I actually really enjoyed it, and I just had a general question. I'm very curious about how the participants spoke about faith. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that, only because I'm curious if they meant it in like dogmatic ways or more expansive ways.
From analyzing the transcripts, when they talked about faith, it was just personal to them. One viewed it as being a Christian, one viewed it as the experience and the connections they had. So but mainly it was just about the religion aspect when they talked about having faith.
Thank you.
It's really nice. You know, I did a piece of work recently on nurse navigators, and the thing that stood out for the champions was that they knew where students had come from when they patients came from when they came into the hospital, and they knew where patients were going to. So it's like that interest in your case, I think students' lives and the mentoring and the nurturing of that within their STEM programs. I could see that in some of those comments as well.
That was one of the themes that emerged a lot. And so the response were very student focused. It was about building the students, mentoring the student, giving them what they need, giving faculty what they need to give to the students. And so that was very important among the presidents and the deans.
What do you do now with this piece of work? How do you scale up and share these lessons?
Go ahead, Nisha.
No, I was saying I'll let Dr. McHale get that.
Well, we actually have a big team of persons from CASEL here. In addition to the researchers, we have our executive director in the audience, Dr. Taylor, as well as Kirill is somewhere here who asked a question earlier. So we're all here. And the scale up, we want to take a lot of these lessons and feed it into our education program. We do have a whole education arm of CASEL that is really preparing future leaders, working with HBCU emerging leaders through a year-long leadership fellows program. So the center is more than, we presented some of the research here, but the center is really not just engaging with the current leaders, but engaging with the research, engaging the research with future leaders, as well as we have a knowledge translation piece. So the scale up, we're continuing interviews. There are 103 HBCUs. We expect to interview persons from 2/3 of the, like quite a number of the HBCUs. So we're continuing this work. I'm continuing to refine the framework. We started with the framework, Bowman and Gallows with the 4, but it was because that was a starting point. It wasn't expected to be our ending point. And I think we have seen the emergence of the spiritual and the connection to the students and the connection to the community that really isn't part of that framework. So we're working forward.
Fabulous. Well, good luck with that. That's such important work. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else from the team wants to add or even put it in the chat. It's a really rich body of work. We have 120 something interviews total thus far, and we're going to be adding about 60 this year. So
yes. I thought Dr. Taylor was looking for his mute off button at one point, but
I just wanted to add that the existing body of literature on HBCU leaders is, when you analyze it, it has somewhat of a deficit refrain. And so the research that Nisha and the Castle research team are putting forward is a more asset-based perspective around leadership that's coming from the people who actually serve in the leadership roles.
Thank you, Angelique. That's so important. Well, we'll just move on. We've got one final presentation to add, and that's Shannon Sampson and Min Xiao. Sorry, Min, if they're going to talk about STEM as well. So the application of culturally responsive framework to develop a measure of readiness for teaching STEM in high needs schools, sorry.
Yes, thank you for welcoming us to this session. I think that some lines got crossed. So we appreciate you all pulling us into this one. And I'm going to share my screen and play our video. Decided that's the easiest way to do this. Hopefully it works just fine. Can you see that?
All good.
I hope you can hear the sound.
Shannon, you'll have to unmute yourself so we can hear it.
No, actually, you have to make sure that you share sound when you share your presentation.
Okay, I do not know how to share sound, so hold on a minute.
There'll be a little box there. Just look along the.
Is it when I share screen?
Mm-hmm.
So I see how to share my screen.
Look along the.
And then, within the share screen. No, I don't know how to do that.
There's a little checkbox bottom left of your share. Yeah, bottom left of that share screen box.
Okay, I'm going to try again. I don't know if I just did that or not, but we'll try that.
No, I think you're going to.
Oh, now I can't hear it either. Can you hear that?
Can you see that little box down the bottom of your share screen?
Yes. So hold on. I'm not sure. I don't see on the screen how to do this.
Oh, pop out of share screen, Shannon. And then go back into share screen. And before you share, look at the box that says share screen. And on the bottom,
I think I have that. I hate to interrupt. I think I have this covered and I can do it through our media space. Give me 1 second.
We were getting there, Tim. We got like women's secret powers.
Hello, I am Shannon Sampson, and today I'm with Min Xiao, and we are going to be talking about the application of a culturally responsive framework to develop a measure of readiness for teaching in high needs schools. We're from the University of Kentucky, and we work in the Evaluation Center in the College of Education. I'm the director, and Mean was a research assistant working on a project that worked on developing this tool. So a little bit of the background of how we came to this work. We are the external evaluators for an NSF project that is designed to recruit STEM majors and STEM professionals to become credentialed secondary mathematics and science teachers that will teach in targeted regions of Kentucky, and that includes Appalachia. And one of the pieces of the project is that the students would feel prepared to work in high needs schools. One of the activities is to host a summer workshop for pre-service and in-service teachers to provide strategies and a support network for teachers in high needs schools. So one of our evaluation questions was, to what extent does the Integrated Summer STEM Institute adequately prepare noise scholars to teach in high needs schools in Kentucky? So part of our challenge was to figure out, how do we measure if they feel adequately prepared for that task? So our purpose was to illustrate a culturally inclusive practice in survey development. And again, we are developing it for teaching in high needs schools, but what we'll do today is talk through how we develop the tool using measurement principles, not necessarily psychometrics, which is what we ended up doing, but to think about how we prepare a survey so that it might do well once we run it through validity and reliability checks in the psychometric way. So this is a picture of how we think about survey development, and some of my colleagues and I put this together as we work with stakeholders on thinking about how we take a survey or develop a tool that measures within a context of evaluation what it is that what they need to measure, what they're interested in measuring. So we'll talk through this tool. At the top of the tool, we have, or of the graphic, we have kind of the things that go into what it is that we're interested in measuring. And so we have oftentimes the standards or the project, what it is that we are, whatever it is that's trying to be measured, we're trying to come up with a conceptual definition, but a conceptual definition that is contextualized. So we look at literature and theory, we look at standards, we look at stakeholder input, and we think about culture within that. We move from this conceptual definition down to an operational definition. So we're thinking about how we actually measure what it is that all these different groups have defined. And so moving from an operational definition, we're trying to think about how we measure this construct from low to high. And so we're moving from sort of concepts and ideas toward a measure. After we think about what the measure would look like, we think about what are good survey principles. So what's the context of the survey, what's the purpose, and what will be the uses of that instrument. And then we run it through design principles to come up with a tailored instrument. So that is our full process. And we just continue to kind of think through what it is, all the different pieces as we build the tool. So Mean is going to talk about, go ahead, Mean, if you want to move forward. She's going to talk about how we took this process and how we thought about these different pieces within the context of the project we were measuring culturally responsive teaching, or teaching in high needs schools.
Thank you, Dr. Sampson, for introducing this cultural inclusive survey development framework. And hello, everyone. I am Ming. Thank you for being here with us. So the next thing we are going to take a look at is the way how we apply this framework to apply a survey. We would like to call it as readiness for teaching in high needs school. So we started with defining some key concepts that we would like to measure, such as high needs. As Dr. Sampson mentioned in previous introduction, to construct a clear conceptual definition, it often based on multiple sources, including existing standards, theory and literature, a consideration of culture, such as different perspectives about the concepts from various stakeholders, experts, and people in marginalized group. And reviewing existing standards is our first step to define high needs. So the first step that helped us to understand the definition of a high needs school is No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. So based on their definition, a high needs school is defined as within the top quartile of schools statewide in unfilled teacher positions, located in an area where at least 30% of students come from families with income below the poverty line, an area with a high percentage of out-of-state or non-licensed teachers, high teacher turnover rate. Another standard also helped us to understand how we can determine teachers' preparation, such as a prepared teacher should be able to foster relationship with family in a variety of communities. A prepared teacher also should be able to engage in culturally responsive educational practice with diverse learners in diverse cultural and socioeconomic community contexts. So instead of relying on standards only, we also listen to stakeholders' voice to just try to gather firsthand information to learn what does high need means for them. So we had focus group interview with in-service teachers who were teaching in high needs school. And we have a talk with faculty who helped pre-service teacher to prepare teaching in high needs school, and the faculty also supervise student teachers in high needs school. We also listen to students' voice from an open source that is provided by Kentucky Student Voice Team, which is a student organization. And we basically take a look at their Twitter post and the podcast, listen to their podcast. So in addition to standards and stakeholders' perspectives, we also reviewed some of literature and existing instruments. Even though we did not find any existing instrument that is specifically designed to measure preparation for teaching in high needs school. But some of the items in SWOTU's culturally responsive teaching self-efficacy instrument are matched some of the trials that in-service teachers and the faculty mentioned in focus group interviews. After consider all of the sources together, we have this clear conceptual definition, which is the definition for preparation for teaching in high needs school. And we define that as confidence to teach in a school that faces a number of challenges that may have led to many unfilled teachers' positions, a high teacher turnover rate, or unlicensed out-of-state teachers. Many of the children in high needs schools face various family, social, or economic challenges that can detract from their focus on education. The schools also tend to be culturally and linguistically diverse and present many opportunities to engage students' unique funds of knowledge. So according to this definition, we developed many potential items for the survey. So this is the screenshot showed a survey matrix of some of potential items that we developed. So this potential items is intended to measure skills and confidence in their ability for teaching in high needs school. As you can see, we color-coded different sources for each item, and almost all items were based on multiple sources. the survey matrix could be very helpful for us to review or tailor the items in the later stage of survey development. So after we consider conceptual definition, and also we consider the context, purpose, and use for this survey. So we move to the tailor potential items, and here is our final items. So for our next step, we really hope to run some psychometrics analysis, and we would like to take a look how survey item difficulty could reflect or be along with teachers' ability. And yeah, that's the way how we develop this survey and apply this wonderful culturally inclusive framework.
Yes, and so we actually have begun to use this within the project. So we do have empirical information, but what we were sharing today is the kind of the conceptual, the process that we take in building the tools, so that when we begin to do the psychometric work, again, hopefully we have a tool that does measure well what it is that the project is looking to measure, but that's very inclusive of the various voices that are important to the construct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love that you got to a point where you're measuring confidence. It just resonates really with the youth programs I evaluate, looking at just the building and confidence and the uplifting of young people. So it's great to hear it in a teacher education space. Questions or comments in our last few minutes? I should start picking on people.
I honestly think these sessions were phenomenal. I think there was a lot of really good information. I think that everyone's really brought some excellent discussion to the platform. I'd like to see the continuing sharing of information, knowledge, resources, and keep at them, ladies and gents. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim. When Angela said strength-based, it suddenly shook me out and went, oh, of course, people do stuff that's not strength-based. But it was wonderful hearing from you all about your strength-based work. Any further comments? Is that you, Carol, reaching for your unmute button? So I told you I was going to pick on people. If there's no further comments, I just like you all to encourage you in the work that you're doing. Really just, I loved that Shannon and me, you were chucking in Twitter and podcasts into your mix with your literature review. I remember a book that I've passed on to others about granny midwives, where the woman drew on biographies, autobiographies, oral history, songs. And it was wonderful. And it reminded me this morning about how do we get the human voice into our practice? And so, the Castle team, we saw that with those quotes, the human voice. And actually, those human voices really spoke to me. And they said, actually, this is not difficult, people. It's not difficult to step up in a space of leadership within an educational institution that's going to support students to be the glory that all they can be within science, technology, engineering, and maths. And I think that's so important because, I mentioned the Greta girl before. I think that what we're seeing in Indigenous and minority communities around the world is young people wanting to take action within a climate crisis. And so they want to step into STEM. They need to know that there's a space for them there to be able to access it. And I think we need those now I'm going to get it wrong, the HBCUs, to provide, I think what Tasha really described, that young people are trying to provide just that self-determination, that self-sovereignty. HBCUs are sovereign spaces in a sense. They have the place, the space, the people to charge ahead with this and to be just that beacon for young people, that they can do stuff that's going to make a difference in their future. And I think if I hark back to Tasha's talk again, just that notion of gaining a place beyond yourself, finding, I guess what we would describe and Aneta will resonate with, is going out and finding your tribe, finding those people that my colleague, I'm sure it's Sharon Nelson Barber, says, the people you can talk half stories with, that you don't have to explain all this stuff about how you get to where you are now, because you're talking to people who get you, who understand who you are, where you've come from, the trials that you have, the tiredness that you feel, and the impatience that you suffer from because you want to be part of this place, because this place is yours. And so I really just really want to encourage you, as I said in your work, Aneta, find those frameworks, find those ways of speaking into Indigenous evaluation that really inform good, I guess, asset-based, non-deficit structural analyses. Personally, I've given up asking young people when they're in a program how they've changed. I'm over programs being funded that expect people to change. I'm asking them how they've become more of themselves, how this program has given them the things that they need to be who they are culturally, ethnically, racially, and the resources to do that. So we talk about being Māori and doing Māori. How have these programs created a space and a place that what they are is normal, ordinary, regular? So that's what I see across. That's my common theme, my takeaway message from what you've presented here in your work. And I just feel uplifted. Again, the words that Tasha gave me, they're acts of resistance that bring us joy and that are so important for our healing in the spaces that we occupy, and our attempts to push our boundaries back so that those spaces become bigger for more of us. So kia ora koutou, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, my warmest greetings to you all. And I'll go into my afternoon, you can go into your wine time. Kia ora koutou.